Sports Talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the Bears beat reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, and he's covered Chicago sports for 30-plus years. Please welcome Mark Potash to the program. Mark, it's great to have you on. How are you?
Thanks, John. I'm doing great.
So, what did you make of this whole Bears hiring process? Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles now here in Chicago.
Well, I've been around long enough, John, to just kind of feel like this is kind of a same old story. Not that it won't work out, but we've seen these things so many times, and I keep saying when I see all the reaction, it's like act one, scene one, act one, scene two. Talking to the coach, talking to the people who know the coach, going to the coach's hometown. All these things are so almost like perfunctory to me that I'll be honest, I'm probably not a great guy to talk to because I'm kind of jaded at this point, and I'm really I give them every chance. They have every chance to succeed as anybody else. But the history I've seen with the Bears, especially since the McCaskies have taken over, says that it's almost like throwing darts against the board.
How did you evaluate the search process? I know they invested help in Bill Polian, and supposedly Poles went against him when it came to the head coaching hiring. Do you think he helped, or do you think they went about this the right way?
Well, they went about it the Bears way. I'll say that. Other than that, I really can't say too much about it. Other than that, it was a Bears production. They brought in somebody who actually, Bill Polian, just by his resume, is better than Ernie Accorsi. That was a great start. How much they relied on him, I don't know. It seems like all the time. It seems more and more. It seems like George running the show. And the history is that his judgment not very good. And so. I'm not sure. I am dubious of the process, to be honest. Not that they didn't do the right things. They cast a wide net for both searches, at least certainly for the GM search. But they ended it in a hurry. They only interviewed one GM for this as a finalist for second time around. That's I trust the Steelers to do that, maybe even the Broncos, but I don't trust the Bears to do that. And so that raised some eyebrows. I think they even had two. Austin Fort and Elliott Wolf schedule that they declined. When somebody says we know our guy when we see him, like I said just a second ago, I believe other teams when they say it, but the Bears don't have any right to really to say that or to believe that. So I'm dubious of that. And then the process by which Ryan Poles hired Matt Eberflus, also a client of Trace Armstrong. Just a lot of red flags there, to be honest, on the surface. That doesn't mean they can't succeed. It doesn't mean it can't be Jerry Angelo and Lovie Smith all over again, or Bill Belichick for all we know, as far as defensive coaches. So it can happen. I'm just curious about I'm dubious of the process, and I think that's a fair criticism with the Bears because they don't have a very good record of judging people. This is look at the five people they've hired beforehand for GM and coaching positions. Not that they weren't good people, but they didn't work out. And a lot of that is because they hire good people, but these people kind of get consumed by the dysfunction at Hell's Hall and just become what I call a lesser version of themselves. Not that Ryan Pace wasn't a good evaluator, but with the Saints, he has a hand in finding Drew Brees. With the Bears, he thinks Mitch Trubisky is the answer. What went wrong? That's the kind of thing that happens. And so I'm not saying that Matt Eberflus cannot succeed or Ryan Poles, but I'm just, like I said, I'm dubious of the process that got them here because of their past history.
And I saw your press conference question. Great question that you asked. Why stop the search with Eberflus? Why did Poles just all of a sudden know that was his guy when there were other guys that the Bears could have interviewed a second or third time? And
again, his response was, I found my guy. And this is a guy who's never been a GM before. He's never hired anyone before. When I asked him, what interviewing hiring process have you been through that leads you to trust your intuition? His response was, well, I've interviewed players for the draft or whatever. And that's fair. I mean, that's an interviewing process, but that's not a hiring process. You're not on the hot seat. It's not the same thing when someone else is going to pay for your mistake. It's like I can pick games like crazy when it's not my money, on the line. When I go to Vegas, all of a sudden I'm nervous. My mind turns to mush, and I can't pick a winner for nothing. So I guess that's really the question. I mean, this guy, he's impressive. Ryan Poles might be very good. He might be the answer. But I'm saying, based on what you've seen about the Bears, what are the odds that a guy who's never been in a management position before, never hired anyone before, all of a sudden he knows after one guy walks into the room, that's his guy, without looking at other guys he might have, including Eric Bieniemy, who was with him in Kansas City, Dave Tope, people he knows. I'm just dubious of that, and so I think, and that's fair. That's fair. To push back against that is kind of ridiculous. I don't think, based on what you've seen from the Bears over the last 10, 20, 30 years, you really can't, all you can say is, you're right.
How much time do you think they get compared to Nagy and Pace in previous regimes?
How much time will they get?
Yeah.
Well, that's actually an interesting question, because the tendency is to be patient, but there's a cumulative effect that we've seen here, and that, people are not, if this does not work out well early, people are not going to be happy, and they're going to show it. I really feel like they're going to show it by not showing up, and just, they're going to hear it. So I think they will get a fair amount, unless things like go totally off the rails, which I don't think they will, like it did with Trestman and Emery in 2014. But no, I'd say the usual 3 to 5 years. I mean, 3 years for the coach, 5 years for the GM. At least, pretty standard, but again, never underestimate Hallis Hall dysfunction and what it can do to coaches and GMs and just everybody who walks in that building, because the history of it, the last 30 years since the Ditka era ended, is that, it just hasn't been very successful.
Where should this team be in 3 to 5 years? Where do you think would be a good spot to gauge how they've done?
Well, it depends. Now, one of the key factors is who's the quarterback in Green Bay. And, that is a huge factor in the success of any Bears coach, any Bears general manager, is how bad are the Packers. So that's one that, this team should be competing should be in the playoff picture on a consistent basis. And that's the whole key. It's not just, in 1 year of Nagy, they were a playoff team and looking like they were going to have a good run, but they can't sustain anything. The key is for the Bears to do something that they have not done since Ditka in the 80s. And that's not just getting successful, but sustaining success. So really, where they're going to be in 3 years, I mean, I appreciate the question, but the bigger key is where they're going to be in 6 years, 8 years. Will they still be contenders? Because the Bears, I think that's where the frustration is. The Bears have been successful. And again, that's kind of a point I've made about just the whole McCaskey thing, is every single regime, even the most successful ones, have been disappointing to some extent. Even Ditka, the great Ditka regime, they went to one Super Bowl. They had one of the best teams in NFL history, one of the youngest teams in NFL history, went to one Super Bowl. And that is as the McCaskeys began to take hold of the organization after the death of George Hallis. Lovie Smith had 2 great years in 05 and 06. It faded out. And Lovie is the most successful, since Ditka, the most successful tenure, which frankly would be the least successful tenure and it's the least successful 9-year period for any Packers team in the last 30 years. So, and also even Nagy had the great year with Vic Fangio and the great year in 2018. But again, it ended in disappointment, not just that year, but they couldn't sustain anything. So I'm looking at it from a bigger picture. And that's it. Not how quickly can they be contenders, but how quickly can they have sustained success? Because frankly, they just haven't had any since the 80s. And like I said, even that ended with, a lot of people, even Ditka, when we talked to him at the 100th anniversary thing, says, unprompted, says, yeah, sure, we didn't go to another one, but, acknowledging the fact that, like I always say, the Ditka Bears are known for going to the Super Bowl, but only going to one. So I don't mean to harp on that, but I'm just, my point is sustained success, I think, is the biggest key for the Bears. Not getting there, because they've gotten there under previous coaches.
Why is this the Bears' MO? Why has it been this way for the past 30, 40 years in Bears history?
Well, I just don't think the McCaskeys are very good managers. I think they are bad at football, and they are bad at managing. And you can't be bad at both, because there's a lot of ownerships that don't know anything about football, but they do know how to hire people. Even the Glazers knew to hire, or at least knew to get, Jason Light, who hired Bruce Arians, which helped them get Tom Brady and won them a Super Bowl. And they've won 2 of them, and they don't know anything about football. but you got to know how to manage people. You got to know how to manage situations. And the Bears consistently do not. They always have these embarrassing fiascos. Like, even just last year with the Thanksgiving Day report, the news report about, that Matt Nagy would be fired and was fired and would still get the coach game. Instead of just refuting that right away, a report that could easily be refuted without people wondering what is the real truth, they let it fester. And those little things contribute to dysfunction that take a franchise down. And there have been many more episodes I could point to, but that's why. It's because they're like I said, you got to be either good at football or a good manager. If you're good at both, it's great, but you got to be one or the other, and they're neither.
Mark Potash.
Did that answer your question?
Oh, that answered my question.
Okay. Sorry.
Mark Potash here on Sports Talk Chicago. Mark, how did you evaluate Justin Fields' rookie year?
Uneven, I guess. Unimpressive, I guess. Whatever the word is for it, doesn't give me the impression like Justin Herbert did last year that he was about to explode. That was a disappointment. Not that he wasn't good. I wouldn't expect him to be good, but at least show me signs that you were coached well enough that you're ready to take off. And now they're kind of back at square one. I still think he can be as good as people think he can be. So I'm certainly not giving up on him. But that was disappointing the way the whole thing was managed from the beginning. And I'll admit, I'm more on the side of Nagy in that respect and Pace. I just feel like they got stuck where they promised a starting job to Andy Dalton before they knew they were going to get Justin Fields, and that boxed them into a corner. Because not giving Justin Fields a fair shot, that's a bad thing. But promising a veteran a starting job and then pulling the rug out from under him, that kind of thing leaves a bad taste in people's mouths too. That gets around the league too. That's not an easy thing to traverse for them as it would be for us on the outside to say, oh, just give Fields a starting job. Just let him get first team reps. So my point is they were stuck there, and that was a tough break because there's no way Andy Dalton would have been signed, I think, because he wouldn't have taken he would not have taken a competing role. He wanted to be a starter. And so anyway, that's an old story, I know, but they kind of got stuck there. So that's where they were. So I think Fields starting clean. I think that's the best thing. I agree with everybody at the press conference that Fields, you can just tell by his, I don't know if it's body language or what it was, but just the feeling that he's really looking forward to a fresh start. And I think that's going to help him. And just by being the number one quarterback, I think that will that just puts him on a more standard route to success than where they were last year.
How concerning were the turnover numbers to you in his rookie year? Could that be correctable?
Well, I think that is correctable by putting him in better situations. But I think that is concerning because, and not to get too far off the track, but I'll tell you the truth. The biggest thing was his injury numbers. He's supposed to be Russell Wilson. That was one of the big comps, I think, for him. Russell Wilson's one of the toughest and tough. Yeah, he's tough. He gets up. But toughness is also not getting injured in the first place. That's Russell Wilson. They need Russell Wilson toughness from this kid. And that remains to be seen. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the turnovers is that he was put in bad positions where he was getting hit, where he was not comfortable. He did not have a comfort. He was not in a comfort zone. I think that was pretty obvious. And I'll be honest, I'm only saying I hope that when he's in a better comfort zone, he has a more normal or better turnover rate. But I don't know enough about the game, about playing quarterback to know that is absolutely true.
How do you think he progresses this year?
Well, that's tough because we don't know how much of a transition it's going to be. Act 2, Scene 1, he's learning a new language. It's like learning a new language. Get ready for that one. So we don't know how much the transition is going to be. If these guys are on their game, if he's well coached, I expect him to make actually a big jump because I'm a bigger believer in what the Bears have, even on offense right now than most people. I think people are down on the Bears' talent because this offense made everybody as bad as they can be and showed you the worst version of every player, from the left tackle to the left guard to the right guard, the right tackle, the wide receivers, the tight ends. Everyone looked worse. So I think they have more talent. So I think, and I could be wrong. In fact, Ryan Poles could prove me wrong in a month. by getting rid of by doing a total overhaul. He might see it totally different, which would be fine. But I'm saying is right now, I think there's more talent here on offense. So my point is that I think there's a bigger chance. This is not the overhaul that even Ryan Pace had when he started and got rid of all his best offensive players. I think if he sticks with these guys, I think that'll give Fields a better chance to succeed. Because I just feel like he's got better talent around him. I just think they were putting really bad offense.
Who would you say is a part of that talented group? Like, I know Allen Robinson may not return. Are you talking about Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, guys like that?
Yeah, absolutely. David Montgomery, Cole Kmet. But not only that, I mean, guys like Cody Whitehair and James Daniels. Cody Whitehair had his worst year of his career. He's 28, 29. You might think, well, it's over. And maybe Poles will pull the plug. He could. He was a Pro Bowl player as an alternate a few years ago, and he's really dependent. He's a guy, you plug him into the Chiefs offense, you can win the Super Bowl with him. I would argue that. James Daniels, plug him into the Chiefs offense, he all of a sudden he's not the dead weight that he might look like in this offense. Allen Robinson, and who knows what will happen? Maybe his gripe was with the coach and the GM, and they are both gone. Maybe he's a guy who he has no problem playing with developing quarterbacks. He has no problem playing in developing offenses. So it's not like he wants to go to Green Bay, or he wants to go to the Rams. He's more than happy. He's shown in the prime of his career, he's been more than happy to play for Jacksonville and Chicago. Maybe he comes back. He's another guy. He would be exhibit A of a guy who's going to be so much better in 2022 than he was in 2021, because that was one of the biggest red flags of the Nagy offense than anything. So all those guys and go through the offensive line. I think will be a real big key. I think that will tell you where Ryan Poles thinks. Now, he's an offensive line guy, and that will tell you, because the offensive line is the one thing that some people could tell you they should totally start over. I can make the argument you have 4 guys in place. Your left tackle is a first round caliber player who was drafted in the second round, who you feel like, Tevin Jenkins, we have no evidence that he's not what he was. Like I said about Whitehair is a Pro Bowl caliber player at his best and still not too old. James Daniels, a free agent. You got to sign him, but he's their best offensive lineman, certainly a Pro Bowl caliber guy. And Larry Borom is an interesting guy who just by the eye test, he was less of a problem than Charles Leno has been in some of his best years. When Leno makes a mistake, you always saw it. That was one of the problems with him. As good as he was but Larry Borom, just watching it, even if he made mistakes, very rarely did you look at him get sacked and look back and you see Larry Borom's number. You know what I'm saying? I just feel like my point is, you could argue that they have 4 pieces in place for their next playoff offensive line. Okay, they got upgrade center. You could also argue that they need to start over totally, which could be. So my point there is that I think Ryan Poles will determine really where they are talent-wise because of the offensive line, and I trust his expertise in the offensive line.
With all this being said, what's your expectation for next year? Maybe a way too early expectation, but what's your expectation?
Well, it's funny. I do a weekly a column on the very first and 10. At the end of each one, I do something called the barometer, where I pick the Bears record in season, how they're going to do. And I did the last one I did. I think I had them like 10-7 for 2022. That was before they had even fired anybody. I can't remember. But anyway, my point there is I'm more optimistic than most that they have the makings of a playoff team already on their roster if things click. And if Aaron Rodgers gets traded, that's another factor. So, I don't see this as this. Like I said, Poles could make this a rebuilding year in a hurry. But I could also say that given the landscape of the NFC North, with Minnesota also in transition, the Lions still the Lions, and the Packers certainly starting over at a couple of coaching positions, they're going to have transition no matter what. I think the Bears at least have a chance. They have the makings of a team that could at least be in playoff contention even next year. I know that sounds like poppycock now, but things change an awful lot in the NFL, and I always say, never underestimate the mediocrity of the NHL, of the NFL. So things can change. So I guess I'm more bullish than most. Not so much on, I can't predict what the coaching staff will do, but just the fact that the way things go in the NFL, I feel like good things can happen to this team. And don't forget, you got the quarterback. That's a huge X factor. If he becomes a star, if this coaching stuff is for real, the quarterback coach, the offensive coordinator, well, then it's a new ball game, right? Even with this, maybe people disagree. I'm saying even with this supporting cast, it's still a new ball game if Justin Fields becomes Justin Fields.
Well, that calms down the cynicism a bit. At least there seems to be something going in the right direction for this Bears team, which is good.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm not down on them. I'm dubious. Like I said, I mean, I don't trust them to be the team to do that. But I'm saying I don't think that they're dead in the water for next year. For one thing, the biggest and great starting point is that Fields is, even though he didn't really show much, even by the eye test, he's a much better starting point than Trubisky was for Nagy in 2018.
Mark Potash still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Mark, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, your career. How'd you get your start?
Let's see. How did I get my start? It was a long time ago. I've been 40 years in the business. I did a real standard route. I went to a good journalism school at Missouri, and I had friends who were ahead of me and helped get me a job, get me jobs. So I started working in Little Rock, Arkansas, and when I started, I thought I was like beating the bushes. I was from Chicago. I thought Little Rock was small. It turns out that's like starting in AA. I mean, that was really a fortunate thing for me. And then I worked for 3 years at the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, and that paper folded in 1986. So I was kind of without a job, and I started stringing for Taylor Bell, who was a high school the high school guru at the Sun-Times. And again, I'm from Chicago. Sun-Times has been my paper literally since the day I was born. So that was my first inclination, was to try and hook on there. And next thing you know, I was full time in 1990, and have been there working my way up ever since. And it's been a great run.
How different's the landscape from 1987 to today?
Well, it's totally different, especially now. It's changing even more and more now. Just in a lot of ways, the access is totally different. Athletes are different. There's social media now. I grew up in this business in a day, believe it or not, where even professional athletes needed good pub, to further their careers. And certainly high school kids did. And so I covered a lot of high schools early, and it's always a big advantage. It's always great to talk to people in my business. It's always great to talk to people who want to talk to you. And we get that fewer and fewer, less and less. That's always a big difference with high school kids. But even with the pro guys in the early days of my career, like I said, you guys still needed good pub. They needed a good story on them. That made a difference, get some in the paper to their career, their post-career, whatever they wanted to do. And they needed us more than they need us now. Now they don't need us at all. They literally can have their own website. They can do, we're just not as valuable an entity to athletes, teams, whatever. So it's a lot different. The landscape, frankly, is a lot different. If it was like it is today, I never would have gotten into it. I'll say that. It's just too different. It's just a lot of guys who grew up with it. They're happy with it. They're fine with, the way, especially now in COVID, with the COVID where there's no locker room access. There's very few one-on-one interviews, and the scary thing for our business, that might become the norm. We're waiting to see how that happens. We're kind of fighting against that, but. If it's like it is now, it's just all podium press conferences, and those are not really good press conference, interactions. Those are not good interactions. It's just it gets athletes scared. They feel like they're on stage, literally on stage. It's like being on television, and there's a nervousness there. There's not as much casual access as there used to be, and I think that has made the job a lot less enjoyable for people like me.
Do you really think that's going to be the norm if you had to guess today? No more locker room access, more press conferences, and limited access?
I don't know it all depends. I really don't know. I see it trending that way because there aren't enough people. There aren't enough. What's the best way to put it? There aren't enough Prince and Mucamaras who would go out and tell their teammates, "Hey, no, we need to have people. We need to have reporters in the locker room. We need that kind of access interactions," because I think some people do enjoy it. but there's fewer and fewer. I'm talking about the athletes, but there's not enough of them. There's too many others that just, they just can't. You can see it on their faces when we walk in the locker room that they don't want us there. So I think they will win the day. And that would, I guess I'm just a pessimist, but I would predict it would be closer to that than the old days of open locker rooms and with people in them. That's the other thing. You got to remember, last few years, even before COVID, open locker room was not what it sounds like. So, so that part has changed too. So yeah, I see it going at least trending, certainly, maybe not absolutely when COVID is done or diminished, the COVID effect, but I see it going more the way it is now. And it's almost anybody in our business would agree that's really not a great development.
What's been your favorite locker room interaction with a certain player over your time covering sports?
Well, that's a tough thing to answer, I'll tell you the truth, because I'd have to think about over 40 years. And I can't say, off the top of my head, I'm real bad at off the cuff like this, so it's hard to say. But the best interactions are conversations. And we used to be able to have conversations with people where there would be give and take. I remember talking like one time to Akeem Hicks, who's a real personable guy. And we were talking about, him signing with the Bears. And he's a guy who I really admired because I thought he was an interesting guy because he signed with the Bears when they were very formative over the Patriots, who were the team you want to play for. Even Prince told me once, yeah, everybody, I'm just like, yeah, everyone wants to play. I want to play for the Patriots. Everybody wants to enjoy that. Well, he chose so we were talking about, like, sometimes that happens and, the other team didn't really want him. Well, he was explaining to me that, the offer he got was actually a really good offer. And Belichick made a point of calling him a personal phone call to get him back. So anyway, we were having a conversation about this. And then I felt like he was kind of rushed or he had to go or whatever. I said, okay, I'll let you go. He said, no, I'm enjoying this conversation. And he wanted to keep going. And that's the kind of conversations that was a few years ago. That might be the last time I've had a conversation like that with somebody. But those are the kind of those are the kind of interactions that I think any of us in our business really treasures. And I think everybody would agree that there's just not that many of those. We just don't get as many. And those, so that's why the Zoom interviews are so bad, because you'll notice they're answering the question to get to the next question. They're not trying to have a conversation. And our business is all about one-on-one contact, conversations, really getting to know people. And that's what I miss the most. I forgot what your question was. I hope I answered it. John, sorry.
You did. No worries. And one more question before we finish up. What's the toughest press conference question that you've asked before?
Well, the toughest one I think was that when the Blackhawks had a press conference when Patrick Kane had sexual assault charge against him, and so they still had him playing for the team because obviously nothing had been determined. And so they had a press conference at Notre Dame. They opened their training camp in Notre Dame. I think it was in 2015 or 2014. And so they had him kind of face the music, but it was a really awkward press conference. I don't know if you remember it, but a lot of people will. It was a really awkward. It was like one of the first missteps by John McDonough, who's like a PR maven, and he had this thing where he like totally was totally off his game. It was a PR nightmare. So anyway, one of the issues I thought was, Patrick Kane, whenever he was in the newspaper outside of hockey, it always had something to do with drinking. It's the fact that he's always drinking. So I asked him, I didn't know how else to ask it. I just said, are you going to give up drinking? So I'll be honest, it was uncomfortable. I think it was a fair question because I think that's the root of a lot of his off the ice incidents. I think that's proven. And I guess some people had a problem with it because it was excusing his behavior or whatever. Anyway, as far when I think back of the awkward things that I've asked, that was the one that got, I think, the most attention because I was kind of nervous and I didn't know quite how to phrase it. And hopefully I did the best I could. But also, just the other day, to tell you the truth, at the press conference, that they got kind of criticized, I guess, when we were talking to Ryan Poles about about the process. And so I asked him if you could have had an extended process, would you? And he came back at me and said, yeah, I was given that opportunity, and I found him, pointing to Eberflus. And And that was a little awkward to me because Eberflus was right there, but that was the Bears' fault for having concurrent press conferences. That was another bad PR move. The GM of the team, who's on a different level than the coach, should have his own press conference. So by putting the coach there, it kind of put him in an awkward position. And not saying that he should, and it wasn't that insulting because I wasn't saying that, would you not, do you wish you would have hired somebody other than Matt Eberflus? But no, do you wish you would have had in your first job ever hiring people? Do you wish you could have interviewed more than 3 people and found more than one guy? You're just, had your one guy. So that was really the question. But anyway, that was another one that, and that was only because of social media, kind of got tagged a little bit. And that kind of sicked the Bears Kool-Aid drinkers on me, which I regret, but that's part of the job.
How much flack did you get for that? Do you try to ignore it? Like when somebody comes after you on social media, do you just ignore it when you ask a question like that and people are all over you?
Yeah, I'm incredibly sensitive to it, but I also ignore it. It's kind of weird. I'm not saying it doesn't bother me because it does. In this case, it really didn't bother me because the one thing, and it was, a couple of my friends in the business actually kind of got, tagged me in a tweet, which kind of got everybody on there. No big deal. I mean, that's fine. But what it was what I noticed was all the blowback, as best I could tell, were all these fans who just did not want you to question the process whatsoever. Whoever they hired is going to be great. How dare you question them? And they're the people who were probably cheering when Matt Eberflus said, no applause. They want. And so I don't want to make a bigger deal about that than it was, but I did get blowback on that. But my point is that that blowback didn't bother me because it was so compartmentalized. It was just one group of Bears fans who just do not want to question any process. And no matter how many of these guys fail, like I said, Phil Emery, Ryan Pace, Mark Trestman, John Fox, Matt Nagy, no matter how many times, for some reason, they have no memory. And it's everything starts over. And I disagree with that so vehemently that I'll be honest, that blowback did not bother me at all. And I did not really even respond to it. Because I thought, it was an awkward question and, maybe, I don't know, was it right or wrong? I don't know. I thought it was the right thing to do.
Mark, I fully agree. That's why I asked you to come on. And I know, we've been in contact before, so I'm so happy you made the time for me. One of my favorite Bears reporters, because you always do tell the truth and you're not afraid to mince your words of what other people have to say. But I really appreciate you coming on with me today. Thank you so much.
Well, John, thanks. And I always tell Sylvie, whenever he gives me that compliment, I always say, I am afraid. I'm terrified of asking those questions. But it's my job. I do it anyway. I muster up the courage to do it, I guess. But anyway, thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it. A great job. You do a great job. I've seen these before, and I appreciate you having me on your show.